Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Truckee Downer PUD. It's 6 o'clock, June 7th. Shauna, could we have roll call, please?
Thank you. President Finn? I'm sorry. Director Finn?
Here.
Director Aguera?
Here.
Director Harris?
Here.
Vice President Laliotis?
Here.
President Bender?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Joe.
Hey,
You want to do the pledge?
here I will.
Awesome.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There you go.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. Brian, any changes to the agenda tonight?
Yes, President Bender, we would like to pull consent item number 12 and place it on the action item portion of the agenda. Staff would like the opportunity to present a little bit more detail this evening for the board's consideration.
Got it. Okay. All right, that takes us to public comment. Any public comment tonight on any item not on the agenda tonight? All right,
No, Mr. President.
great. That takes us to director update. Director Finn.
Oh, you're starting with me.
I could start on the other end.
No, that's fine. You
okay.
can start with me. But I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to take everybody else's time. So just as well. Good evening. Thank you. Happy to be here. I've got a little bit of a director's comment tonight because of some conversations that I have had in the past couple of weeks that sort of inspired it. So the electricity industry is doing an amazing job right now of rising to meet the climate challenge. It is transforming, and by that I mean decarbonizing, faster than any other segment of our economy, which is really good since we are the basis of pretty much all the other segments of the economy. But this rapid pace has become fertile ground for a lot of mis- and disinformation. Science denial, the classic climate change is a hoax, seems to have morphed into solutions denial. And I've had multiple conversations in the past few weeks with friends and colleagues, smart, educated, thoughtful people that I really respect, that were both disturbing and eye-opening for me. And it prompted this director's statement about pushing back on solution denial. So I'm going to use EVs as my example tonight. You can pretty much insert any technology here from solar panels to biomass, but I'm going to use EVs tonight. EVs are frequently criticized for hidden environmental impacts, from carbon dioxide emitted during manufacturing, to the source of the electricity used to charge them, to concerns about battery recycling. And, this critique works because there's an element of truth to it. But it is also misleading because it leaves out all of the ways electric vehicles surpass gas-powered vehicles over time. It is a fact that driving an electric vehicle is cleaner than even the most efficient gas-powered car. Electric vehicles will only get cleaner as we clean up the grid, as we introduce more renewables into our grid. So here comes the misinformation that I hear a lot, is that due to battery manufacturing, greenhouse gas emissions from building EVs are higher than those from manufacturing gas-powered vehicles. Of course, there are emissions from building every vehicle, but those who want to maintain the status quo leave that part out. And what they absolutely do not mention is that those increased emissions during manufacturing are quickly offset by the zero tailpipe emissions during the operation for the life of that vehicle. For example, if you buy a Tesla that's manufactured here, it's not here, Nevada, Reno, it takes 1.4 years, traveling 18,000 miles, to offset the emissions of manufacturing that vehicle. And I'm really hoping that you drive your Tesla for longer than 1.4 years after you've bought it. So anyway, you can see how easy it is to confuse people and to undermine the solutions that we have But we're at a point where we all need to try to pay attention and to push back against that when we have the opportunity. There are really amazing resources out there to help us recognize some of the most common rhetorical tactics that are used to create confusion. I came across a lovely mnemonic device, FLICC, F-L-I-C-C, which stands for F, false expertise, L, logical fallacies, I, impossible expectations, C, conspiracy theories, and the other C, cherry-picking data. All of these things are used to create false narratives, to confuse us about what is real. So once your eyes are open, you start seeing this everywhere. If you dive into the internets for even a short amount of time, you come up pretty much covered with FLICC. The Environmental Defense Fund estimates that Facebook users view climate misinformation 1.36 million times every day just on that platform. So we have a problem here, and we are in a climate emergency. So we need to start standing up for ourselves and for our industry and for our solutions and push back when we have the opportunity. And coming up with creating this director's statement, there's a lot of resources on the web to help us. PolitiFact, I used a lot. In the Environmental Defense Fund website, the Center for Energy Education, the National Resources Defense Council, the EPA, and Snopes are all excellent resources to sort of help us recenter. When you hear things and you're like, that just doesn't seem right, go check it out. Learn and shut it down where it is, don't spread it, and start combating lies, myths with the truth. So I will be continuing on this subject for future statements. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Krista. Joe, any?
All right, I have nothing for you.
Okay. Tony,
Nothing, thanks.
Kim's got something.
Of course, I always have something. I just wanted to let everybody know that I did attend the Aqua JPIA meeting. Sadly, John Ping did not win the election. But the I left my notes at home, but the two individuals that did win the election are actually two of the candidates, some of the candidates that I would have actually pushed to the top of the list to vote for. So it worked out well, and then we had a couple of classes, one on AI, which was very interesting, and then also on benefits. But since our benefits are with NRECA, it didn't really apply to us. But it was good to network there, and it was fun to be a part of it. And sadly, I left before the actual Aqua conference started, but that's okay. I feel like it was a good representation to go and be a part of it. And then, I always like to take this opportunity to thank our staff. I know you all work really hard. It's really nice. I'm sure you guys are all appreciating all the flowers outside and the beautiful weather and, no snow. But now starts dig season and lots of projects and, construction and traffic and some of those things. So just stay patient, but, I just want all the employees to know that we do appreciate all the work that you do to keep the lights on and keep the water flowing. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, Brian, back to you. General Manager update.
Thank you, President Bender. We have a few guests this evening with some really rich presentations, so I'll be as brief as I can. We have included with the agenda packet is a kind of a general manager's update list of some items that I think are relevant and interesting for the community and the board to see over the last month. I'll touch on a few topics that I just wanted to kind of emphasize. The first of which are some of the electric and water projects that are occurring in the community. And it's kind of that phrase we've been using, if your rates, your dollars at work. On the water side, a lot of capital infrastructure improvement projects. The most significant of which are the Pioneer Trail Pipeline Project. The community is probably has noticed that the Trout Creek Trail connecting the Bridge Street downtown area to the Tahoe Donner subdivision has it's interrupted. We've closed down the upper section for that pipeline project. Staff's intention is to get that completed and off-site before the 4th of July holiday. We're still on task with that. Connected with that project is the 6170 additional water storage, the tank number 2.5 million gallons of additional water storage for the community. Also with that is a Pioneer pump station. If you've had an opportunity to go in the area over by the concrete batch facility off Trails End, that team has started that work. The initial excavation and underground pipe work is in the ground. We're really excited about that project. It gives some redundancy for the community, providing water service and fire protection up into the Tahoe Donner subdivision. Also, the annual water main replacement project, that's currently underway in the Glenshire area. So there's a couple of streets out there that you'll see our crews working. That's the annual replacement for aging or undersized infrastructure. Staff also completed an important project for us internally is the Glenshire Master Metering Project. This is part of our overall plan to improve our data validity in terms of water loss tracking and understanding, we have kind of the mass balance of water pumped from the ground and water metered at the end user. We don't necessarily know where that water might go in some of the subdivisions and the hydro zones within our distribution system. So we're actively installing key meters across the distribution system there. This is an important one. On the electric side, the Bridge Street undergrounding project, you see, I believe it's Rupert out there doing work on West River Street. That's impacting everyone's day on a daily basis in terms of traffic. But it's a big project, a collaborative project with the utility and the town.
Brian, what are they doing? Are they widening the street or I don't see one pipe out there.
So there's a couple of components to the project. Most of the work along West River Street is, the current work they're doing is off the street and kind of the sidewalk and the edge of the right-of-way. The overall project is to improve sidewalk, pedestrian, and bicycle traffic access, underground utilities where we can, and create some new interactive spaces in terms of walkways, bicycle paths. The master plan is to have a new park area at one end that's connected with a bridge going over the Truckee River, and then create an integrated space into the Brickletown area. So it's a long-term project. We're doing 2 partnerships with the town. One is some of the new underground water system improvements. And then we're still working with the railroad company on access rights to put overhead utilities underground. And so that will help free up some of that sidewalk space and add some better aesthetics to the entire area. Yep. Our team is also continuing to actively work on our pole replacement projects. This is a combination of hardening our system, replacing aging or degraded poles, and it really puts boots on the ground for inspection of our distribution systems across our territory. Kind of anecdotally added to that, we are continuing to experience ever-increasing challenges in supply chain, particularly related to poles. And so our most recent assessment, we tried to place an order for pole replacements, and we're looking at 33 to 36 weeks for delivery times for poles. And we talked about the transformers, pad mount transformers, switching, reclosers, meters have already been challenging in the supply chain nationally. We've seen some of our partners on the federal level appeal to the federal government on supply chain mitigation measures to help get some of this infrastructure in place. We're now seeing it in the pole replacement component as well. And then finally, you'll see, and I think there's an item on the agenda this evening for some engineering consulting authorization. The staff is working on a Martis Valley substation upgrade. This will have another presentation later on that, but we're beginning that process. That'll take over the next 2 summers, substation improvements that are important for that. It's a critical substation for our distribution system. We have a team from CMUA this evening presenting updates on the legislative and regulatory landscape of California and beyond. So I'll skip that section of my updates. In terms of financial planning and resiliency, I just wanted to touch on one item. It may require some additional detailed explanation later on, but the district is happy to report we did receive $476,000 in funds. Our share, our fair or proportionate share of a joint powers legal settlement with the members and NCPA. That this is related to the Central Valley Project Improvement Act. There was a litigation settlement related to the power cost or power rates from the period of 2008 to 2020. And the district participated in that Central Valley project for a short period of that time. And so our sort of proportionate share of that recovery is $476,000. That's a lot of money. And so we're very happy. Staff will bring back during the budget process on where to appropriately place those funds. One of the proposals will be that we talked about in the previous meetings, the $3 million overage in power purchase budget for the end of 2022 and early 2023. Staff has a proposal that might help offset some of that refurbishing or reestablishing some of those funds in the rate reserve fund. A lot of other good happenings and participation, collaborative engagement across the community and all of our partners. I won't go over the details. There's a good list here of projects and initiatives we're working on at the staff level. A couple of other things I just wanted to point out. We have a new agenda management software system that we've put in place. If you haven't noticed, it also incorporated a calendar format of organizing our agenda packets on the website. So it's a very clean, easy, user-friendly, intuitive agenda management system that helps staff in terms of streamlining the efficiencies of agenda development and distribution to the board and the public, and also kind of a one-click access on our website. We'll continue to work out some of the bugs and quirks of any new implementation, and there's also some tools that are included in our software packet for the board in terms of managing or reviewing agenda items. We haven't deployed those yet because we want to make sure the bugs are out in terms of actually developing the staff reports. Just simple things like you can't justify the text like you could in Word. And so we're trying to get to know some of the quirks and intricacies of the system. But I think overall it'll help with our transparency, help with our ease of access, and overall agenda management. Did have an opportunity with staff to meet with Nevada County LAFCO. This is related to the board's broadband initiative, community-wide broadband, and really engaging on LAFCO's perspective on kind of the incremental process that we need to be aware of in terms of what the threshold is or the milestone that as we approach the requirement to include LAFCO in latent power consideration. We're not there yet, I'm happy to report, but we did talk about the next steps in funding feasibility studies and some of the challenges we have as a special district here in this community. And so I'll have some more presentations and opportunity for board feedback and consideration at a later date. Just wanted to check in that we are making sure we're in compliance with those processes. We are underway, I believe June 5th was the deadline for submittal of the electric utility director application process. We're recruiting a new director, bittersweet, but we're happy for Joe Horvath announcing his retirement, but also challenged with replacing that critically important position here with the district. We had a very good turnout in terms of application submittals. We haven't yet met with our recruiting firm to go over the early list, but we hear it's quite rich, and we're looking forward to seeing what opportunities are there. At the appropriate point, we'll include the board in that interviewing process as well. The board is aware of this. I just want to make the announcement to the public as well that we continue to work on our strategic plan update. That's moving along well, and we're looking forward to later this fall rolling that out for board approval and publication to the community that we serve. One of the things that we're going to start actively communicating across our service territory is the opportunity to participate in community circles. This is the community's opportunity to engage with board and staff on giving feedback and comments on the proposed initiatives, the strategic plan layout, some of the projects. So we'll break those down into sub-communities within our service territory. September 11th, that week, we look to have scheduled and have invites for community members abroad to come in and participate in this process. And I'll end there.
All right, thank you, Brian. That takes us to item number 8, our guests from CMUA. And Stephen.
Good evening, President Bender, is this on? Yes, and members of the board. We have a presentation from CMUA tonight. I'll do a quick introduction of our guest. Brian was going to kind of set the table a little bit. We're going to do some presentations. Welcome to ask questions or interact as we go, and then we'll pause at the end and hopefully have a good discussion. I want to welcome Danielle Blassett with California Municipal Utilities Association. Danielle is, I got to get the title here, the Deputy Executive Director. We also have Andrea Abergel, who's the Manager of Water Policy. We have Frank Harris, who's the Manager of Energy Regulatory Policy. And on Zoom is Patrick Welsh, who is the Senior Director for Energy Policy and Strategy.
Let's start off, if you recall, members of the board, last year we had CMUA join us, I think it was in the early spring or late winter, to virtually at that time. We're glad to have them in person this time to really lay out some of the regulatory and legislative landscape for California, some of the challenges that are broader, overreaching the entire state, and then get into some focus areas that might have more specific impact on the community of Truckee. We're currently engaged in our strategic plan, and we've had a lot of discussions about the energy and water sector and some of the challenges from a regulatory perspective, cost of service, resource planning. All of those things are critical in our responsibility for this community. CMUA and the staff that's here this evening are essential partners in that process. They are the folks that we team up with to really, one, have a larger voice in the state capital level, but also more awareness. This team, as you'll see, is a tremendous resource in making sure that we're informed where we need to be on, the just voluminous legislative text and, bills that have been submitted over the last several years. And so I can't emphasize enough the value this team has in terms of us keeping on task with some of the challenges the district face. So with that, Danielle.
Great. Good evening, President Bender and directors. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight. Very happy to be in person. It's not that bad of a drive, especially with the snow, at bay right now. But I'm going to turn it over to Patrick really quickly because he has to go early. But I wanted to just say, if you want to go to the next slide. Today, we're going to talk about the 2023 legislative session, what's been happening on both the water and the energy side, and maybe some also kind of crossover issues. And then we're going to talk about regulatory matters. And of course, we can answer any questions that you might have on any topic related to either of those areas. Next slide. And really, before I turn it over to Patrick, I really just wanted to stress and kind of follow up on what Brian was saying, that our mission is to be a partner with all of you and all the stakeholders that are involved in the water and energy policies. We are a better association because of the involvement of all of the staff at Truckee Donner, and also for those of you on the board who have been able to make our events or provide input. That's absolutely critical. We're a team. We're a very large team, but we're a team, and we depend on the expertise of folks within the district to help us do our job better. So just want to express that appreciation. Next slide. And again, this was just 2022 session, giving you a little bit of detail on the number of bills that we followed on both the energy and the water side, and then over 30 water and energy regulatory proceedings. So there's definitely a lot of things to follow. But I think the next slide is going to be where I'm going to turn it over to Patrick with our first sponsored bill.
Al, and good evening, President and board members. My name is Patrick Welch, as Stephen said, Senior Director of Energy Policy. I appreciate you letting me present virtually today. I wish I could have been there in person, but it's good to see you virtually. And Stephen, just want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Great. So wanted to talk about a few things really quickly. We have a slide up here with our sponsored legislation. And I think Frank will touch a little bit more on this when he talks about regulatory issues, but we are co-sponsoring along with the Northern California Power Agency and the Southern California Public Power Authority a piece of legislation that would not necessarily overturn the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule at the Air Resources Board, but seek a few modifications to it. In particular, the bill would require that any regulation that seeks to influence purchases of heavy and medium duty vehicles considers that they may be needed for emergency response. They may have to go across different terrains, and specifically that a regulatory agency can't necessarily impose a arbitrary year purchase date for those vehicles, or excuse me, an end of life restriction on those vehicles. Pleased to say that bill has passed the Assembly actually unanimously. We've been working with Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. He is our author. He is from the Imperial Valley. And this has been a big effort, really mainly led by Frank and all our agencies, including Stephen and the team here in Truckee Donner, been really working on this for a number of years. This legislative effort pairs really nicely with our regulatory effort. And really our focus as CMUA and is not to say our members don't want to buy these vehicles. They don't want to buy zero emission vehicles. Rather, our message is we want to buy those zero emission vehicles when they're commercially available and when they can perform duties that are reasonably comparable to a traditionally powered vehicle. And really that's because you operate in unique operating conditions, have to respond in inclement weather and respond to emergencies. We've actually found that our message really resonates. Danielle and I met with, 30 to 40 different legislators on this issue, ranging from the most conservative to the most liberal. And I'd say across the board, they all understand the message of utilities. Let's buy zero emission vehicles when it makes sense. Where there are certain barriers for implementation and operational capabilities, let's make sure there's some accommodations and off-ramps. So that's really what the bill is about. And looking forward to moving it through the Senate over the next month or so, and hopefully to the governor's desk. The Air Resources Board hasn't taken an official position, but we do understand that they have some concerns with the bill, so we'll have to deal with that over the next month or so as the bill heads hopefully to the governor's desk. Danielle, did I want to turn it back over to you to talk about the other sponsored bills?
We'll go a little bit out of order. Why don't you talk about the big energy bills so that you can get to your appointment?
Yeah, and I encourage if any of the board members, if you have any questions while I'm talking, please don't hesitate to interrupt and ask questions. Or at the end of this very brief presentation, happy to engage in dialogue and answer questions as well. We have 37 new legislators this year. That's a third of the legislature. So we're still getting to know them. They're getting used to their new jobs. We've now entered back into a legislative session that's post-COVID, so we're back fully in person. So there's this new kind of cadence to the legislative process. Over 2,600 bills were introduced this year. About 150 of those are related to energy. Really, I whittled it down to three major issues. The first one is that the governor has proposed a new mechanism that would right now apply to Truckee Donner. We're working on changing that. And it would set up what is called a capacity payment that during summer months, if you're deficient on meeting your planning reserve margin, the Energy Commission would have the authority to assess. They don't call it a penalty, they call it a capacity payment on you if you are found to be deficient for certain planning standards. The other part of that bill is that it would authorize the Department of Water Resources to engage in central procurement for a variety of different resources. That process is voluntary for publicly owned utilities. So in the future, if this bill were signed into law, the Department of Water Resources could be contracting for clean energy resources, and you could potentially have the opportunity to participate in those contracts. You would have to engage your customers in a certain non-bypassable charge to be able to do that. So that's one of the major energy policy debates that's going on right now. One thing that I think is also really relevant to Truckee Donner is the discussion and debate about reforming the ISO governance. So that's the California Independent System Operator. Reforming that governance so it's no longer dependent on a gubernatorial appointment, making it an independent board, and then creating a pathway for the ISO to become a regional transmission organization. You're probably aware of this. There is competition in the West for markets. You have the ISO creating an expanded market. They want to eventually move to an RTO. You have the Southwest Power Pool down in Arkansas that's creating their own market and expanding into the West. That's seen as two competing markets. There was legislation this year, AB 538, that would have reformed the ISO so they can become independent, not dependent on California's political process, and move towards an RTO. That bill was shelved. We don't think that issue is going away, though. We understand that the governor has actually been briefed on this numerous times. He has tasked the president of the Public Utilities Commission, Alice Reynolds, and the vice chair of the Energy Commission, Siva Gunda, to work on this issue. So there is a likelihood that there could be another piece of legislation that surfaces between now and the end of the legislative session in September. I think this is really unique for Truckee Donner. You guys aren't part of the ISO, you're in NV Energy, but NV Energy is kind of potentially caught between this ISO SPP dynamic. So it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. The political element in California, or the legislative political element, is labor unions are highly opposed to the change that was stopped by AB 538. And that's ultimately one of the factors that led to that bill being shelved. But I think this is an ongoing big discussion in California, and I anticipate that conversation will continue this year, either through the administration, maybe through some executive action, or through a potential another piece of legislation that could surface here at the end of session. And then finally, AB 1482 is actually just recently shelved. I included on here, though, because it represents two things: a continued really strong interest in deploying electric vehicles and facilitating that transition reliably to zero emission vehicles with a focus on EVs. But it also represents a really big focus this year on interconnection issues. Legislators are hearing up and down the state from businesses, home developers, EV charging companies, that their utilities, and when I say utilities, I'm predominantly talking about the IOUs, are very slow at interconnecting new chargers, new homes, new hospitals in some cases. And so legislators across the political spectrum, they've held hearings on this issue on interconnections. So it's something to be aware of. The POUs so far aren't in the crosshairs. I think the POUs are doing a really good job at trying to be as timely as possible in interconnecting things. But I think it's definitely something for the board to be aware of, that communities are upset about the time it takes for utilities to interconnect and energize an EV charger or a new home or a hospital. So that wraps up my brief presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I also just wanted to emphasize too that really appreciate working with Brian and Stephen and the whole team there. It really is a partnership. We work also really closely with the Northern California Power Agency. I'm on calls with them almost daily to coordinate our activities. And it really is a whole team effort to represent your interests and the broader interest of the municipal utility, whether that's electric or water in Sacramento, and bring your perspective to bear in these important policy discussions. So I appreciate your time tonight, and I appreciate your team's work in collaboration with us as well.
Thanks, Patrick. We'll take a brief recess on the presentation right here to see if anyone has questions for Patrick, because he does have to leave.
Okay. Any questions on the board so far? From the board?
This might be a really big question. Does CMU have a position on reform of CalISO to a regional entity, a more regional entity than just California?
Yeah, we do. We have some foundational principles, and I think that foundational principle is really stepping back and saying what's in it for the consumer. And that's the lens that I think we as an association try to view things. And the reason why that's important, because removing the current process for the ISO and creating independence inherently puts them on the path to creating an RTO, which would involve the perspectives of other states and other utilities, and would also involve the costs of those other states and other utilities. That could be a great thing. That could be a problematic thing. And so we think that at the end of the day, the process needs to be clear, and there needs to be a clear stakeholder engagement process to ensure that when decisions are made, they're made in the best interest of everyone. And obviously for us, in the best interest of your consumers and California consumers more generally. So I think our members have expressed us, they're very interested in this issue, but they just want to make sure that any decisions that are made in the best interest of consumers. I'd be happy to go into more details, but that's kind of at a high level what the perspective is.
Thank you.
Nice. Oh, hey,
Could I ask a question, please?
yeah.
Thank you. Patrick, I heard you say that the capacity charge, the bill that would impose the capacity charge would apply to Truckee Donner. Is there rationale to include us even though we're not part of the ISO? And is there a lobbying effort to cut us out or carve us out?
Yeah, and so this all stems from the summer reliability challenges that have been particularly acute in the ISO balancing authority area. Last year, the state set up what's called the Strategic Reliability Reserve, which is basically an extraordinary asset that the ISO and the governor can dispatch when it's super hot out and we don't have enough power. They dispatched it last September, and it's one of the things that helped kept the lights on in the ISO. And this proposal says, well, we want to charge essentially utilities and their customers in certain cases for dispatching that resource. So since that's a CAISO resource, really, we are having discussions about whether or not it is appropriate to apply those types of capacity payments to entities that are not inside the CAISO. So we've got no commitments yet, but definitely we have entered in that discussion and raising policy considerations to make sure that any capacity payment mechanism is appropriately tailored to the problem and the situation at hand, which is an asset for the ISO.
Nice. All right.
Okay.
That's it for questions.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Patrick. I appreciate you tuning in.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you. I'll talk
Thank
to
you.
everyone later. I appreciate your time and good to see you, board. Appreciate it.
So we do also have other sponsored legislation as well, which is continuing to move through the process, SB 366. And really what this bill does, it's on the water side. It modernizes the California Water Plan and also establishes long-term water supply targets for the state. And really what we're trying to accomplish here is moving from this idea of a mindset of scarcity and ratcheting down water use and how are we going to do more with less, to why don't we talk about a future in which there's enough water for all beneficial uses, including, urban, agriculture, environment, everything that is needed to make California the place that we all love to live. So that's what we're working on with that bill. It has passed the Senate. It's on into the Assembly now, and we're co-sponsoring that with the counties and also with the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. And I wish I had better news on our workforce development bill, which would have created a high road utility careers program at the Workforce Development Board, but that was held in its first fiscal committee despite a very low fiscal estimate, which just tells you that the Appropriations Committee process is pretty much a black box in California legislation. We talked about the big energy bills, so you can go to the next slide. Big water bills, this is actually probably something that you all will be very thankful for, but the biggest fight right now in the California legislature has to do with water rights. And these bills would not affect Truckee Donner, but did just want to highlight the fact that that these three bills are taking a lot of bandwidth. I think it's Andrea's full-time job in addition to all the regulatory work to staff these bills for CMUA. So I won't go into the details, but just know that that's really a high priority for the overall water community and something that we're all working on. There's a few water conservation bills. AB 1572 bans non-functional turf in commercial, institutional, and industrial properties. It currently includes multifamily, but that's going to be taken out of the bill. AB 1573 has some requirements related to planting native plants in these same areas where non-functional turf will be banned. And then AB 755, we were talking a little bit about this earlier. It requires water utilities to include the incremental costs of major water users' water use in a cost of service analysis. So it introduces hypotheticals into your cost of service analysis and can create other problems. So we're working to oppose AB 755, and we'll continue to do that. Another big thing that's taking a lot of air out of the room is the governor's infrastructure trailer bill package. There's 10 trailer bills total that he kind of came up with, and they're not really super new ideas, but he's just packaging them all in an effort to try and leverage a lot of the federal funding that's going to be coming to California. There's concern that because it takes too long to build projects in California that we'll lose out on some of that federal funding. There are 3 that are especially relevant to CMUA member utilities. CEQA reform, these are some ideas that have come up in the past, but it would accelerate the process for judicial review and then the administrative record process. And then there's also a proposal to take the fully protected species designation that's in statute right now and move all of those species over to either threatened or endangered under the California Endangered Species Act. So most environmental groups are concerned with, they want to have a dialogue on the overall package and the merits and the policy merits, but both the environmental groups and the legislators are very concerned the fact that you've got substantive policy bills going through the trailer bill process. The governor introduced these to the world a week or 2 ago and wants them to be passed by the June 15th budget. Legislators are so far pushing back on that, so we'll see if it happens or if things happen later in the year or if they're converted to policy bills. And one thing that's not on the slide that I did want to quickly mention is, the last couple of years, the state's had an abundant surplus of money. So there's been lots of money to go around. I think it was $90 billion this past year. This year, we're estimating, or the state is estimating, a $32 billion deficit. It's actually a really kind of pluck it out of the sky number, because most of the Californians who pay the most amount of taxes are not going to be filing their taxes until October because of all the delays with the storms and how both the state and Fed said, you can wait till October to file. So we really don't have a good picture of where we are in the state with our finances. But in the governor's budget proposal for May, he didn't say he was cutting programs, but he migrated them over to the conversation about a water or a climate resilience bond, which is occurring in the legislature, and they're trying to work on a proposal that will come together for the March 2024 election. Probably we're hearing in about the $15 billion range. So that could be another opportunity for the district to access funds on both the water and the energy side, because there are components for both in some of the proposals. So I think that's all we have on legislation. So before we turn to regulation, happy to answer any questions on legislative matters. Okay, then I think next slide. Frank, you're up.
Great. Thank you very much. President Bender, board members, Stephen, Brian, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. And I want to echo the comments that have already been made regarding the merits of being here in person. It's really wonderful to be here in person. have a few pieces of regulation I want to talk to you about on the energy side. I'm going to go a little bit out of order on this list here. I realize that you are NV Energy and not CAISO. So I'll just very quickly mention the 9.3 billion transmission plan for 2022-2023. This is of great interest for our CAISO jurisdictional utilities. And so we've been participating in that process. We have a member of one of our outside counsel that does a great deal of work with the CAISO and has been tracking that and participating with that. In terms of the third item there, the Energy Commission on the new planning reserve margin, this is a little bit difficult, and candidly, the Energy Commission kind of does this periodically. They have deadlines, and this process for the new planning reserve margin is supposed to be completed by the end of this year, and candidly, the Energy Commission hasn't started it yet, at least not in terms of a public-facing process. So we'll have to wait to see where that goes. The third item that's on that list, which is the first item listed, is the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. I know that you are all very familiar with the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. Director Finn, I absolutely appreciated your opening comments. One of the things that we have been steadfastly trying to support and project, make sure that the regulators and the legislators understand this, is that when we are engaging with the agency and Patrick is engaging on the legislative side, we're not asking for a carve out. We are not asking to somehow be lifted from this obligation. Our members, including you, are actually building the infrastructure, developing the programs to promote EV purchase. And so we want to make this work. The counterintuitive is that in order to build that infrastructure and maintain the infrastructure, we may not be able to use electric vehicles, or you all may not be able to use electric vehicles for all of your work, particularly, as Patrick mentioned, the emergency response, where you may have crews out there 12 on, 12 off, while the trucks are on there 24 on until the job is done. And I suppose I'll do a little editorializing here and speak for myself. And I think that the future for our work trucks in this business is probably hydrogen, which can be more easily refueled. And hydrogen is permitted under the Advanced Clean Fleets. It's a zero emission process. The specifics that California is looking at with hydrogen is that discussion is ongoing. We've I think we've done very good work on this, and part of this I have to thank Stephen and Brian for this. We held 2 offsites for CARB staff and legislative staff. One was held at the Imperial Irrigation District. Southern California Public Power Authority took a lead role on that. And so we were able to take people down there to see actually how they do their work and the equipment that they use. We also had an offsite that Stephen and Brian hosted here at Truckee for CARB staff, went actually up into your service territory. It was quite interesting. We had a bus, NCPA hosted a bus for some of our guests, and the driver wouldn't go to some of the places where your trucks have to go. And this was in the summer. It was not snowy, and he would not drive up. Stephen, remind me which water tank that was that he wouldn't go up there. We had to walk. I can't remember, but
That was the Glacier View water tank at the top of Ski Slope in Tahoe Donner. Could not get up to the tank on the south side of Donner Lake, because that's a very
yes, and so that was really interesting. This was just a normal, like the shuttle bus you get at the airport. And so we've been able to get some great accommodations in that regulation. Some that were very important to Truckee, for example. Originally, the regulation was offering an extension for low population counties if your operation was exclusively in a low population county. Truckee's operation is not exclusively in a low population county. We were able to get the regulation to recognize that if you are 75, or as Truckee is 90% in a low population county, that's okay. So you get an extra 3 years. Also, the regulation originally, and still does, offer a full exemption for dedicated snow removal vehicles, but we have very few members. I only know of 2 that own any purely dedicated snow removal vehicles that are not used for any other purpose. Even here in Truckee, you have interim snow removal vehicles. You put a blower on the front of a work truck during the winter, but you use it multiple ways throughout the year. And so we were able to get the regulation to recognize that, so that now that those vehicles are, the obligation for those vehicles is extended to 2030 before those vehicles get pulled under the regulation. But again, all of this is an effort to make sure that you can maintain your systems, particularly in emergencies. And we really pushed, I really pushed, all of us did, to make sure that the regulators, and on Patrick's and Danielle's side, the legislators understand we weren't, and we're not, continue to not look for a carve out. We just want to be able to do our jobs.
And let me just be clear that I absolutely understand that. I think it's ridiculous that legislators wouldn't recognize that these vehicles don't exist, for example, and that we are vital services. And it just,
Right.
you know, this whole thing was like, they also are indulging in magical thinking and not reality-based,
Right.
you know, progress. Like, we have to keep the lights on and the water running throughout this entire transition. If we falter on that, it's all going to go to hell, right? So I attended that that day
offsite,
where
yeah.
we were on that tour and have been following this as well. And I absolutely applaud the work that you guys have done to try to bring common sense to this discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we've done, I think we've gotten quite a bit of positive modifications to that rule. There's one element that I'm not happy about. Get a little bit in the weeds, but there are some exemptions or extensions in the rule that only apply if you're replacing a vehicle that's at least 13 years old. Many of our members cannot justify keeping vehicles that long. They can't afford to have them break down at the last minute, and so they have to take a very proactive fleet management approach. And so, for example, your Vector trucks, you probably don't keep those 13 years. I don't know anybody who does. I have one other member who has as a board policy to keep their trucks as long as they can, and they're currently renting trucks because all of their own trucks have broken down. So that's what's going on in energy regulation. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions. Okay, that's fantastic. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Andrea. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for the slides. We've got a couple things that are not on the slides that I also want to talk about. So sorry for going off script, but good evening, board and President Bender. Appreciate the time today and appreciate being here in person. I'm the manager of water policy. I really handle all the water regulatory stuff and a bit of the water legislation, like the water rights bills that Danielle mentioned earlier. Thankfully, it doesn't apply to you all in that same scope, so you saved yourselves a headache. So in the water regulatory sphere, the first item here I'll talk about is this urban water use objective that was established in water conservation from 2018 legislation. And that legislative package is an Assembly bill and a Senate bill, directed the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Board to come up with essentially 4 different factors to create an overall budget for urban retail water suppliers. The first 2 are kind of handled and done with. We're not talking about those anymore, but just for your information and completeness today. Indoor water use standard was established through legislation. Those numbers are set, and actually a bill last year lowered those standards. And then the water loss component, which is on the slide as well, just because compliance is underway. That was several years of rulemaking and conversations, intense conversations and negotiations with the Water Board, culminating in adoption of the regulatory package at the end of last year. I think it was October of last year. So we were very involved with Stephen and with staff here to make sure that the specific circumstances here for water loss are incorporated into the Water Board's package, which is some alternative compliance route. And that compliance is underway. There's a couple of deadlines. It's hard for me to read from here, but there's questionnaires that are due in July of this year, the dates being pushed. And then there's an economic model that's part of the water loss that tells you your standard. And agencies have the ability to manipulate that and ask for different parameter inputs. That is by the regulation due by July 1st. But the Water Board has been pretty flexible and has had conversations with Truckee Donner about the circumstances here that, your water that is lost is really replenishing your groundwater basin. So there's not really water loss, so that you have a completely different circumstance. So they're involved, and we'll continue to work with you all to make sure that you have a standard that's feasible. But so the indoor and the water loss are just two parts of the urban water use objective, and the other parts, the outdoor residential standard, and then there's the variance kind of bonus incentive package. But the outdoor standard is a residential standard, and then commercial, industrial, institutional, dedicated irrigation meter conversion, mouthful. The standards are in pre-regulatory rulemaking. They're very behind on this. They're supposed to have done this because your objective, you're supposed to be calculating it by January 1st of 2024. No one's really talking about what you're supposed to do since you can't calculate your objective. Everyone's just moving forward. And the directive from the legislation asked DWR to come up with studies to inform a recommendation to the Water Board. The Water Board would then initiate the rulemaking and come up with this standard. DWR finished their recommendation, sent it over. The Water Board's hands now. Unfortunately, as the Water Board does, they kind of manipulate what has been recommended. So they're proposing a package that is a bit different from what DWR had recommended in some key areas. So our messaging has been make sure that this standard that you impose and adopt is going to be feasible. Although you have an objective to meet, and the knowledge is you can manipulate. If you're not meeting your water loss, you can meet maybe indoor. But if each one of these pieces are so restrictive, it's going to be infeasible and impossible for agencies to meet your overall objective. So that's been a key part of our messaging, because the outdoor piece is the only thing left that they can do. And aside from that, there's variances that will be written into the regulation to accommodate for certain special situations. There's, I think, about 17 variances without going into all the details. And variances are helpful, but it's not as helpful if you're just going to variance your way out of a very difficult standard to meet. So it's this process is continues to be delayed. We're expecting something this month to come out in a pre-rulemaking and hopefully a public comment period to start. But we've been engaging with the Water Board for many months on this, for DWR before that. We're also pulling in the legislators as well to make sure that they can help message to the Water Board that these components of this objective that were negotiated in 2018 are held true today. So conservation is a big thing to keep in mind, and that kind of leads into something not on this agenda, but drought overall is still a concern. We're technically still in drought in most areas of the state, so it's not out of the conversation completely, and it's hard to message to your customers, especially here where you have a lot of snow and you're plentiful in water, but there's still a need to conserve where possible. So the Water Board takes this look at drought seriously, and they have emergency regulation authority to to mandate certain restrictions, which they have done in the past couple of years with the drought, and those are ending, but the board recently readopted a prohibition on watering non-functional turf, and that is going to extend, it just got approved, it's going to extend into a year from now. So that's not a great indicator because we're in a surplus of water right now. If the board's going to continue to utilize that authority when we don't necessarily need it, not sure what else they're going to do. But there's been some pullback by the governor's directive to not engage in level 2 action items of your water shortage contingency plan. So the messaging on drought is minimized, but it's still very important to keep telling your customers that. And relatedly, there's a new reporting requirement that started at the beginning of this year. They called it the Drought and Conservation Reporting Order. And that asks for a lot of information on a quarterly basis, but really you're reporting monthly. You're reporting quarterly, but you're giving monthly numbers. And it's duplicative with reporting elsewhere. And there's some new data sets that they've been asking for, and they rushed into it, didn't include a public process. That public process that we've been asking for is just now starting. So we've been having conversations with the water board and with staff about the necessity for this and the burden that it's gonna have on water agencies to comply and have these duplicative reporting and encourage streamlining. So we're very engaged in that. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was more of a water energy nexus thing that is definitely going to be of importance to you all, as the water board is in the process of adopting a general order for wildfire mitigation activities, vegetation management, system hardening, other infrastructure, and they have released an administrative draft of what this general order is going to look like. We've been actually working on this and following this for the last year or so. And it's intended to streamline permitting so you can apply and have the activities that fall into the category and go through this streamlined permitting rather than get a waste discharge permit or other type of requirement. Really, they're looking for activities that have a potential to impact waters or discharge any waste into waterways or that could impact water quality. So it's pretty expansive, the list of activities, and they've broken it down to 3 different categories of planned activities: emergency fire response, just your kind of basic vegetation management, and then all other activities. And the level of notice changes at each, so you are afforded a bit more flexibility in responding to emergency situations where you need to go in and fix your system or do whatever work you need to do within that time frame because you're responding to active fires or within that time frame. So it's something we are following and engaging on. The timeline on that is expected end of the year adoption of that general order. So that is what I had on the water side. It's kind of a lot, so happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Like to call for public comment. Make sure I include that.
Thank you. No, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you. Any questions from the board?
I got a couple questions. Just want to point out how interesting it is for the state board to point out how the urban water use objectives are going to give flexibility to utilities to conserve how most appropriate for them, but yet you can't irrigate non-functional turf, even though you're meeting your objectives. But anyway, my question is, you mentioned variances in the urban water use objective, and one of the variances that's near and dear to utilities in this area is the seasonal population variance. Because for many years we've fought with the state on how to characterize our population, and when the state obviously uses gallons per capita day as the target, we don't have permanent population in this town, right, or in this region. So we've always fought with that. Have any of your membership test driven that tool that's been released?
I've heard some mixed reviews on the tool, and that it doesn't, to the specific variance point, I'm not entirely too sure if anyone's played with the variances, but in terms of tool feasibility and functionality, not the best reviews. Doesn't incorporate water loss, really, which is part of the objective, and it's just not really workable. So we're actually working with a larger coalition that includes the sanitation agencies and water reuse and Aqua to have more of a presentation from the water board as to this tool. But really that leads into a dialogue of this is not really appropriate. You need to take some time and work on this to make it more feasible and workable. That's the feedback that I've gotten.
Have you, as Truckee Donner, played with the seasonal population variance tool yet, or?
I'll let Chad add on because he's doing the work directly. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We have historical data points that we've used when they did the drought targets back in 2008. They used population, production divided by population. And the first time they did the math, they said, wow, you guys use a lot of water. We were able, through the California Department of Finance, to get a population data, came out of the census, I think, that actually said while we were 16,000 full-time population at the time, our effective population is twice that, 32,000. And then Tahoe City PUD did some excellent work doing some modeling that showed Tahoe City around 2.5x. So I think we have some data and some history to enter that discussion when it becomes important. But it's still, a negotiation until they agree.
Right.
The only thing I would add, Director Oliotis, is when the tool became available, we did try running several different derivatives of it, and we didn't find that to be very beneficial, let me just put it that way, and it really didn't help as much as we had hoped for, the population side of it.
That's good feedback. I think that's it for me.
Kim, are you absorbing? Good. Any other thoughts, Krista?
I don't have a question. I just have a thank you for this. It's a fascinating world, the legislature. And I'm just grateful for all that you do on behalf of the public utilities. So thank you.
Yeah, no, ditto, and really appreciate everyone's work on ACF and AB 1594, trying to recognize utilities somewhat in the same light as other emergency response agencies and needs within the state. So much appreciated. And it was frustrating to see the process go through, but I think there were some wins in there. And I think we'll continue to push 1594, and hopefully we can get it. And in the meantime, we'll just buy a lot of snowplows.
Jeff, I do have a statement. My feeling was after this presentation that CMUA and the TDPUD has a positive relationship, and that I think that's a great thing right there. And I also wanted to thank you folks for coming up and giving this presentation tonight for us. Thank you very much.
It was a beautiful drive.
It's very green.
Yeah, very, very green. I do have a question. Out of curiosity, out of your membership, the number of customers that each of your agencies that are listed on your membership, like how, are we one of the larger ones? Are we one of the smaller ones? Like how?
Definitely smaller.
Smaller.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have, our largest member is Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and I think they have 680,000 connections, somewhere in there. And then our smallest is the city of Needles, and they have 1,600 connections. So.
It's interesting. Thank you.
To give you an idea, I think you have approximately 39 vehicles covered under the ACF. LADWP has 4,200 vehicles covered under the ACF.
Wow, that's a big fleet management program there.
You all are small but mighty.
Yes. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you for coming up in person, so that was wonderful. Yeah, very informative.
President Bender, I was going to close out with, but everyone kind of already articulated the sentiment that I was going to put out there, that CMUA and their team has been just a tremendous value to this organization and the community, helping us navigate through regulatory challenges, planning challenges. The team is just an exemplary team of experts and committed to community service and the membership there. Barry, Danielle, Frank, Andrea, Patrick, and the rest of the team are always available. Definitely a phone call away in terms of a resource, and so it's been an extremely valuable partnership, and that we hope to continue on for a long time.
Good. Excellent. Great. Thank you. All right, so that takes us to our consent calendar. We have quite a few items, 9 through, let me go to the third page of the agenda, 17, and we're going to, all right, thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good night. Yes. A lot of work to do. Yeah.
We know it.
All right, so we have 9 through 17. We're going to pull 12 per General Manager Wright. So is there any director comments, questions on items 9 through 17 of the consent, excluding number 12? No. Any public comment?
No, Mr. President.
All right, is there a motion?
I'll move consent items except number 12.
Perfect.
I'll second.
Shauna, roll call, please.
Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Finn?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. 9 through 17, excluding 12, done. All right, now we have number 12 moving into, I think, Brian, you said to our action item list?
Yes, we have a presentation prepared for the board this evening from Mr. Yan.
Great, thank you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good evening, President Bender and members of the board. Consent item number 12 is to provide an update for a current design project and ultimately request board approval for a contract extension with Fringe Studios. Fringe Studios is the project architect of record. This project was initiated in the interest of aligning with the district's strategic plan goal. Developing an inclusive culture drives organizational integration and success, and by relocating key workspaces from the upper floor to the lower floors and vice versa. The project facilitates an environment of open, transparent communication and support, and the boardroom update improves general utility of this space, hybrid meeting accessibility improvements for virtual and in-person meetings, and improved lighting. Fringe Studio has worked with the district on several interior remodel projects, primarily to design and integrate a newer, more open concept. The areas include the lobby, customer service counter, and the upstairs offices. Keeping the familiar design throughout the upper and lower floors provides a similar feel and approachability for the facility. At the November 3rd, 2021 Board of Director meeting, the board approved funding of a project for the design and remodel of the East Office and boardroom in the fiscal year 2022 budget. A contract with Fringe Studio was approved December 1st, 2021, with a budget not to exceed $44,900. That current contract has expired and needs to be extended to continue with the project. Extending the contract with Fringe Studio benefits the project and the district with continued collaboration with staff for design, submittal of application for project permits, assistance with that, assistance with development of bid documents, and construction administration support throughout the projects. This graphic outlines design progress to date, highlighting substantial completion of design for the East Office area and approximately 50% completion with conceptual design in this boardroom space. And this image represents the proposed floor plan of the lower East Office area. A little bit easier to see in this image. Next, we have a few schematic design drawings that represent the open office concepts for the general manager office and space, and then office adjustments for the public information officer, the district clerk, and then clerk staff. And here we have another angle of the East Office area. A perspective of the entryway, lobby, customer service counter. There are no proposed changes to the customer service counter at this time. And then another perspective of the lobby and customer service counter area. And then boardroom concepts currently in design discussion. There is no additional fiscal impact associated with this item. The design cost to date total approximately $21,500, or less than 50% of the approved budget, and with no additional funds requested at this time. The current contract has expired, and sufficient funds remain from the previously approved budget to continue with the design momentum. And then the recommendation is to authorize the general manager to execute a contract extension with Fringe Studio for architecture design of the East Office and boardroom remodel in fiscal year 2023, with the option to extend by one additional year if necessary. And with that, I conclude the presentation and remain available for any questions.
Great, thank you. Shauna, any public comment or any in the
No, Mr. President.
audience? All right, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
I have one. Oh, go ahead. Okay. You didn't give us a cost on the second contract, or unestimated?
There is no additional cost. We're not asking for additional funds at this time.
Oh, you're just kind of an addition to the last contract?
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's sufficient funds from the first contract,
Oh,
and this would just be an extension of that contract.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Now my question. Thank you for your presentation. It's always good to see the visuals. I get to be a visual person, which brings me to my next question is, and this is probably more for Brian, right? I know exactly. Or Brian Yan, if you want to answer it also. You know, we're approving a lot of projects, and it's great to see the visuals. But now that it's beautiful and sunny, I would propose at some point the board go on a tour of some of these locations to actually see it. You know, like what, you know, I know that we're approving certain things, but it's always good, I think, for us to get a visual for really where are all of our dollars going. I mean, I could drive around town, but it's always nice to get that, you know, the Disneyland tour or whatever. And I mean, this one is right here, and I'm sure you could walk us through at some point. But I just thought that would be kind of a fun activity and also spur just more information and to understand really everything that's going into these big projects.
Absolutely. I think that's a great recommendation, and we will put the Mickey Mouse ears for the Disneyland tour on Mr. Yan. No, just kidding. I think it's a fantastic idea. Kind of two extended offers. Any of the board members individually that want to reach out to me and go tour or have an exposure to our facilities, wherever they're at, it's always an open invitation. We can do that invite. If it's something the board wants to do collectively, we can work on the structure for Brown Act compliance with council and district clerk's office. There are mechanisms, I believe, where we could go into recess, go through a tour, and come back and close out special sessions and such. Requires a lot more planning and resources there in terms of vehicles, but absolutely open invitation for any of the board members to reach out to me and go out with staff and myself.
Are any other board members interested in doing it as a group?
No, that's fine.
Or two people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to more along the lines of two people, like sort of just to be in compliance with the Brown Act and a little more efficiently, a little easier to coordinate logistics.
Correct.
And then at that point, the two board members can decide, perhaps with Brian, what projects they want to see, and what projects are going on, what projects they want to see. So it's usually easier to do it that way. But I'm not opposed to doing that. It's just essentially it would be a board meeting.
I agree that the two board members that go out. So if anybody is interested, it's an open invitation that I am happy to be that second person available. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to go on that tour.
No, and I'd be happy to partner with you and work with staff to go see some projects and/or facilities, and/or both.
Nice.
We will reach out and see if we can coordinate those opportunities.
Cool. If there isn't any other questions or comments, is there a motion?
I'll move that we authorize the general manager to execute a contract extension with Fringe Studios.
Excellent.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Shauna, do we have roll call, please?
Thank you, Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Finn?
Yes.
Director Harris? Vice President Laliotis?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board.
Okay. All right, that takes us to action item number 18, consideration of approval of the Truckee Downer PUD 2023 Wildfire Mitigation Plan and Independent Evaluation.
Good evening again, President Bender, members of the board. This is action item 18. Devastating wildfires throughout California have prompted electric utilities to take action. This was formalized under SB 901, Senate Bill 901, which took effect in September of 2018. It directs all California electric utilities to develop wildfire mitigation plans, or WMPs, related to power lines and equipment. SB 901 requirements for public-owned utilities specifically were that the annual WMP updates with presentations to governing bodies be presented at noticed public meetings for comment and approval. That's what we're doing here tonight. Initial third-party independent review to ensure compliance with applicable rules, regulations, and standards. SB 901, essentially, that was done initially in 2019. And then comprehensive updates every 3 years, and this is the third year, so that's what we're doing here tonight as well. The history of the WMP and the board's engagement in this effort goes back again to workshops in 2019, initial plan development and independent review, approval of that plan and review in 2020, submittal to the Wildfire Advisory Safety Board in subsequent years for the annual reviews, and then again up here this year for the comprehensive review every third year, and this is our first comprehensive review. So again, this is our first comprehensive update. Because it's a bigger effort, staff had been doing the annual updates. We hired for consultants originally with the original plan, so we did bring in consultants again to help with this effort. DUDEC was brought in for the WMP updates, and they have a lot of experience in the state working with utilities. And then Guidehouse, formerly Navigant, was brought in for the independent evaluation, and they did do our first independent evaluation in 2019 as well. We did work through CMUA, and this is another CMUA success story. They have the Wildfire Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Working Group that I attend every 2 weeks with their regular calls. They created 6 sub-working groups to cover the topics of metrics, vegetation management, asset management, grid design and system hardening, risk modeling, and climate change, because we knew these were the issues in Sacramento that were being discussed, and the district staffed all 6 of those across our departments to make sure that we were really fully versed in what people in the state were doing, what our sister utilities were doing, what the requirements were. So the outline of the TDPUD 2023 Wildfire Mitigation Plan, utility overview and context, objectives of the WMP, roles and responsibilities, wildfire risks and drivers, wildfire prevention strategies, community outreach and public awareness, restoration of services, evaluation of the plan, the adoption process through the board and the public process, and then references. And that's consistent across the state with all the WMPs. I'm going to talk a little bit about our wildfire prevention and strategies, because every utility is a little different here. We've talked a lot in recent meetings about vegetation management and the significant investment this board has made in increasing that. We've talked about ELF fuses, another big project that we have, replacing current limiting fuses with modern ones. But those are 2 of a dozen and a half strategies that we pursue, and so I wouldn't want to lose the other ones. The pole replacement program, we talked about it a little tonight, and that's our Osmos contract that the board awarded. The outage management system, a tremendous tool. We use it for tracking, for metric reporting, and it helps us respond quicker to outages and in a more safe fashion. So that's a big investment. And then the recloser policy, one shot. All utilities do it. It has increased summer and fall outages, and that's something we've really had to educate our community on, but it has kept us safe. And so again, there's many practices and programs and projects that are all detailed in the plan, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them right now. So summary of key changes in 2023. We did respond to the achievable comments from the Wildfire Advisory Safety Board and put those in there. It does follow the format that the Wildfire Advisory Safety Board has requested. It includes the district's new outage management system, and it's really outage identification, management, and communications. We updated the progress on the current metrics that were in the mitigation, and we added a new one. We also changed from reporting metrics year-round to only reporting metrics during wildfire season, and we track them year-round, but outages in an atmospheric river or a blizzard really aren't meaningful in terms of wildfires, so we split that out. We do define wildfire season as June 1st to October 31st because we needed a standard window to get the metrics, but we will adjust that based on actual conditions. And if it starts earlier or goes later, we will factor that in. So the two existing metrics were wires down and fires caused by district equipment, and we had 0 reportable events in 2022. And then the new metric is outage causes, and we have that now with the OMS. I don't want you to be alarmed by 309 because it seems like a very large number, but put that in the context of no wires down and no fires ignited. And that does include animal contacts. It includes planned outages for construction. It includes human-caused outages. But it allows us to look at the outages we have and the causes and then factor that into our wildfire prevention and mitigation strategies.
Stephen, that last of those causes, is that only in the summertime?
Correct.
Got it.
Real quick, and Stephen kind of articulated this already, the outage management system uses meter data, so the outage includes secondary service drop, single resident outage, things of that nature. So they're not system outages.
Correct. So with regards to the Guidehouse independent evaluation of the 2023 comprehensive update of the WMP, we chose to contract for this. It's not a statutory requirement, but the POUs in partnership agreed that that was a prudent step to take every 3 years with a comprehensive update. They reviewed the 2023 WMP as revised and presented by DUDEC, and the report concludes, and I don't want to steal the thunder for our financial audits, but you want a clean audit is essentially what this independent evaluation is against the requirements of the law. And it concluded that the WMP aligns appropriately with PUC Section 8387 and includes all required elements. And it concluded that the WMP is comprehensive as described through this report and in accordance with PUC Section 8387. So that's a very positive result. Fiscal impact, there is no direct cost associated with the approval of this 2023 WMP. However, staff and consultant resources needed to develop and maintain the district's WMP and comply with the changing landscape and the requirements of SB 901 have been significant. Notable and dramatic increases over the last few years in the amount of funds that we spend on vegetation management. And the overall costs are included in district budgets, past and present and future. So there is fiscal impact with this, just not with this direct action item for this report. And the recommendation is to approve the TDPUD 2023 Wildfire Mitigation Plan and Independent Evaluation reports in substantially the same form and direct staff to file with the California Wildfire Advisory Safety Board before July 1st, 2023. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Shauna, any public comment or comments out in the audience?
No, Mr. President.
Great, thanks. Okay. Board's smiling. They're looking good. They're content with all the work that you did. So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah. I hope this starts to get easier to, right? This is the first comprehensive review we've had to do. So I'm hoping, that the burden on staff,
Are the tree cutters still on contract or I haven't seen had to renew any contracts with them?
They were renewed. That was done under the annual procurements.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And it's not going down.
Yeah. It's not going down, what, financially?
Right.
And I will say that the benefits to our community of our increased vegetation management, I think, were somewhat evident this winter and hopefully will continue to be evident in the future.
Yes.
Definitely. I was going to say, just on a side note, we got a notice at my house in Sierra Meadows that AT&T has a tree service that's going around and doing tree work. So we just got one of those door hangers, but they're also in the hood.
They're gonna cut them down even lower. They're gonna be little stubs now.
Say, Kim, don't we have to get permission from housing, or homeowners association that cut a
For your
tree?
for your own home, but this is part of AT&T.
Oh, okay.
No, just thanks to staff. I mean, I think it's clearly evident our mitigation strategies are successful. Our investments are paying off. This, we have a clean audit, as you say, with relation to third-party review of our mitigation plan. But I think just boots on the ground, the performance of our system has been exceptional. So just kudos to staff and to this board for continually investing in those strategies. So I do have one question. What is the definition of an outage?
I'm going to take a stab at this, and I might invite Joe up to the podium. An outage is a loss of power, and it can be a temporary loss of power, like a blink, like an intermittent contact. Now, our one-shots, our reclosers are in one-shot during this metric period. But I believe it can be as slow as intermittent to as long as, a full-blown outage.
I mean, like, it's happening tonight, the lights seem to be blinking quite a bit. Haven't you noticed that?
Yeah.
I go, uh-oh. What's happening?
No, I mean, and that's great because it we're not ignoring what might be insignificant, short-term outages. We're including those. So that number at 309, I think, is very impressive. But just overall, I think the fact that that our plan is in compliance, our investments are paying off, I think is just a kudos to, like I say, the staff and board for recognizing the importance of what we're doing. And not just a knee-jerk reaction to underground everything in the world.
Right. All right.
We haven't moved yet.
Are you gonna do that, Joe?
I'll do it now, I will. I move that we approve the TDPUD 2023 Wildlife Mitigation Plan and independent evaluation reports in substantially the same form and direct staff to file with the California Wildlife Safety Advisory Board before July 1st, 2023.
I'll second that motion. File that baby.
All right, we have a motion and second. Shauna, roll call. Yes, thank you.
Director Aguirre?
Yes,
Director
since I
Finn?
made the motion.
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
We got some financials coming up here.
That pile.
Number 19, consideration of the audited financial report for fiscal year 2022.
Good evening, President Bender, members of the board. Good evening.
Hey, there we are.
This is action item number 19, the audited financial, consideration of acceptance of the audited financial report for fiscal year 2022. And with that, I will introduce Moss Adams partner Keith Simovic, who is here to present the findings for fiscal year 22 in the audit report.
Members of the board, very happy to be here. To kick things off, this is the first time I've been in front of the board since 2019. So, comments from anyway earlier that they were excited to be here. It's changed in the town since I was here last. So, all the development and everything that's changed is pretty amazing. So,
Welcome and thank you. And just your mic, flip the switch there or something.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Great. We did hear you though before.
Okay, perfect. Well, and as we jump into the 2022 audit, I know, maybe our thunder was stolen a little bit by the last presentation and their clean audits, but we have lots of good news to share as well. But as Mike mentioned to me during the last presentation, I think on the finance side, we could definitely win the acronym competition. So we'll see if we can do that over the course of this presentation. Just a reintroduction of myself. I know quite a few of you, I think, from previous presentations and of course online as well. But as Mike said, I'm a partner with Moss Adams, and I serve and dedicate my time to our power and utilities national practice. So really, I spend all my time working with entities just like the district here. So we're very ingrained in the power and utilities industry and all the challenges and the issues that all of you face. And we want to bring forth a team, as you can see here, of experts in the industry as well. So between myself and then Julie Desimoni, who is our concurring reviewer, kind of a quality control role that comes in to look at certain key documents, of course the financial statements themselves, all the reports, all the deliverables that we issue as well, our audit process, our risk assessment, making sure, hey, did we do everything that we said we were going to do? Did we follow all of our professional standards? So it's a very key role that we have on every audit that we do. And Julie is another person that's in our power and utilities national practice, and she actually is the head and leads our national practice in that area. So a very key person and a great set of eyes to have on your financial statements each and every year as well. And then Sydney Jacoby, a little bit earlier on in her career, but she serves in our group as well, works on quite a few of our power and utilities clients. And she served as our audit in charge this year for the first time. So we always like to have some new folks that haven't been on the engagement before as well. So you have that kind of fresh set of eyes every once in a while, but someone that is in tune with the industry and sees a lot of other clients in this industry too. So happy to have Sydney back. We had some other staff as well that were involved in the process this year, but this is kind of the core of our team. In terms of the items that you'd expect to receive out of this process when you hire someone to come in and do an independent audit of your financial statements, what can you expect to receive? In the case with the district, there's a couple different deliverables that we issue. Boxes 1 and 2 are related, but there's really kind of one deliverable that comes out of that. And that's really in box 1. And probably the report that you're most familiar with is our report over the fairness and accuracy of the financial statements, right? You'll find that towards the front, more towards the front of your financial statements. And that's through, all the procedures that we're doing, all the testing to kind of validate the transactions and what's presented in your financial statements, making sure that there's actual supporting documentation to show that, hey, what you're recording has a business purpose. It was recorded at the right amount, recorded in the right period, follows all of the governmental accounting standards rules, right? So we do that testing. So at the end of the day, we can give that report and say whether we believe that financial statement before you is a fair and accurate presentation of the district's finances as of a point in time, so December 31st, 2022. Box 2 is related to that and related to the procedures that we do, but this is really kind of that technical review that we do of the actual financial statements themselves, making sure that they are in the form and presentation format that is required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. But we also take it a step further because your team takes it a step further. They put together what's called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the ACFR. So there's your first acronym that we're going to throw out there. The ACFR is really your set of financial statements, but more to it, right? And it's not something that you're required to do. The district didn't used to do this, but puts together an additional documents that are included within that financial report. That then you can submit for the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Excellence in Financial Reporting that's put out there by the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA. 2 acronyms, there we go. That's an award that you've submitted for and received the last 2 years, so very, very good news. So on top of the review that we're doing, a second set of group has a set of eyes on there to say, hey, does this meet all the bells and whistles, and does it go kind of a step beyond what the minimum requirements are? And you've been able to and been successful in receiving that award for the last 2 years. So very good news there, and I believe that you've already submitted for that award this year as well. And then on top of that, we issue our communication to those charged with governance. We'll go through what is included in that letter. Gives you a little more insight into this process. Did we run into any issues? Not just at the end of the day, did we have a clean opinion, but how did the audit go? Do you have any recommendations? Were there any concerns? Did you have issues with working with our team here? Those are the types of things that are included in that letter. Real quick, our audit process, how do we get to this point? I mentioned some of those things and some of the testing that we're doing, kind of alluding to those substantive procedures, and that's definitely where we're spending the bulk of our time, right? The detailed sampling, looking at documentation. But there's a number of other things that we're doing. It all starts with internal controls. We do that at the start of our audit fieldwork because we want to understand, as part of our risk assessment process, what are the procedures in place here at the district, and are those being followed? Not only, are they written policies, do they look good, but are they being followed? Can we see evidence of that? Are there those reviews, reconciliations, approvals? Are those happening all throughout the year if we pull a sample of transactions? So it's a very important piece of what we're doing. IT is continuing to be a greater and greater component of that. As more and more controls are in an IT environment, we need to understand how the system is controlled, who is giving access to folks within the system, how are they reviewing and approving that, how are they removing access in certain areas if someone switches positions or leaves the organization. Those are the types of things that we're looking at and want to be very aware of what the internal controls are there. So that drives some of the testing that we're doing in terms of how large of a sample size do we need to pull? How precise do we need to be with, say, our analytical procedures when we're taking that 30,000-foot view and saying, hey, does what actually happened make sense based on everything that we've heard from your management team? Of course, reading through the minutes for the board over the past year, looking at the budget, did what we're actually seeing here kind of make sense? So that's another piece of what we're doing. And the internal controls is a huge piece in kind of driving how much work we have to do in that process. At the end of the day, this is what you want to see. Your report over the fairness and accuracy of the financial statements. We have our unmodified clean opinion, exactly what you want to see. And any third party that you're providing your financial statements to, definitely the GFOA, but bondholders, anyone else that wants to take a look at your financial statements, your ratepayers, if they're interested, will want to see that you've gotten, one, an audit completed, timely is very, very important, but two, that you've got a clean opinion, meaning that at the end of the day, the financial statements that are presented there give a complete and accurate picture of the district, which is very, very important. In terms of our communication to those charged with governance, I say on there, we don't have any material weaknesses. That is one piece of what's in that letter, but one of the most important ones. That's the one where you want to be looking out for as a red flag. If we had something that we identified as a material weakness, it means there's a significant issue with internal controls that could potentially allow a significant error to occur. So that's something you want to be on the lookout for, but we did not have any material weaknesses noted, so very good news there. So within that letter to those charged with governance, each bullet point here corresponds to different paragraphs that we have in that letter. A lot of this is prescribed by our professional standards, so whether we found something that was concerning or not, we have to kind of note that and confirm that, hey, didn't have any difficulties with management. We received all the documentation that we asked for, those types of things. But there's certain things that I do want to call out each and every year, just to let you know if we found anything there or if anything changed. So that second bullet point down for significant accounting policies, this is something that you'll see within that letter where we note, hey, did anything change in terms of how they're presenting things in their financial statements this year versus last year? And sometimes that can be driven by a management or board decision, but a lot of times it's driven by, hey, there's a new accounting rule out there that you have to follow now, and this is saying, hey, you had a change, you adopted this new standard, and now you've got some changes in terms of your financial statements. In this case, it's related to a new leasing standard that you had to adopt. Every governmental entity, every corporate entity actually too, also had to adopt a similar standard in the current year in how you're accounting for leases, and it changed your statement of net position or your balance sheet to add additional assets and liabilities related to that lease activity that wasn't there before. Before, all those transactions would run through your income statement as you have either payments going out if you're a lessee and you're paying someone else to lease something, or vice versa. If you are the lessor, someone's paying you, you would record those transactions as you're receiving them. In this case, you have an asset and a liability on the books that wasn't there before. That's a change. Audit adjustments made and passed, so we'll see that on the next slide along with a few recommendations, so we can go ahead and move forward to that. I know this is a little bit small up there, but this is a summary, and you'll see it in the letter as well. But whenever we identify something in our testing as we're going through it, and again, kind of tracing back and saying, hey, is what is recorded in your general ledger, in your trial balance, is that in accordance with the governmental accounting standards, right? So we're always kind of tracing what we're seeing and the documentation back to those accounting standards. If anything comes up that's significant, that's kind of outside of what the accounting standards would say, that's what triggers an audit adjustment or reclassification in this case. And that's the case with both of these reclassifications that we'll see. We call them reclassifications, not adjustments, because they're not impacting your income statement. It didn't impact your cash balances, doesn't impact your change in net position or your net income, so to speak. So it's really just a reclass on your balance sheet. And it really has to do with how you're recording and closing out work orders, or at least how you're reflecting those on your financial statements. Because the accounting rules say, hey, as soon as something is completed, construction is completed, and you're using that asset to provide service, right? If there's electrons running through the lines, if there's water running through the pipes, the accounting standards say, hey, you got to show that as assets in service, and you got to start thinking about that depreciation process and recognizing that expense. So there was two items that we noted, one on the electric side, one on the water side, where there was a number of work orders that were accumulated sitting in construction work in process at year end, not being depreciated, the construction process was complete. And so those were reclassified to show those as assets in service on your financial statements. But again, no impact on net income, no impact on cash.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
The work orders, is that just labor costs or is it also materials? Or just one or the other?
All of the above.
All the above?
All the above.
Okay.
So those items are reflected in the financial statements before you, and that reclassification has been made. Go ahead and move forward. So here we have our recommendations, and those are laid out in more detail in the letter as well. The top two items, I'd say, are higher priority than the bottom two items on there. And most of the time, these will relate back to if we did have any adjustments, right, or proposed adjustments. So that top one, definitely we have a recommendation there because of what we just discussed on the previous slide, right? Kind of really honing in on that process of looking at the work orders at year end, and kind of revising those processes to identify work orders that are in service and reflecting them in your financial statements as assets in service. And the FERC chart of accounts actually has a mechanism to do that. So that's something that we've discussed with your team here that they will think about going forward. The user access reviews, this has to do with the IT internal controls that I mentioned that we look at each and every year. So this didn't trigger an adjustment or anything there. But it's something as we're going through and we're looking at internal controls and we're asking about, hey, what's the process when someone new comes in the door and you need to give them access? Who's doing that? What's the documentation? Who approved it? Who can pull the levers in the system? Who can make changes in the system? Who's looking at that? And in this case, there is a process, but we have recommendations to improve that and document it better than what we saw in the current year. So there's some recommendations in the letter related to that. It's not that we didn't see that there was someone reviewing that, but if we say, hey, can you show us there was an approval for this new person that was added, we couldn't necessarily see that documentation. So that's something that we were asking for. The bottom two items, not as high of a priority. The third item there has to do with the review of what's called a system operator control report. So this is anything where you have a third party kind of acting as an internal control for you in certain regards. In this case, it has to do with your NISC system, because NISC is responsible for making changes to the system or doing upgrades and things like that, right? You're not doing that in-house. And so whenever you have an organization that's doing that, there's a separate report that's issued by their auditors to say, hey, do they have good controls? Are they doing what they should be doing? When they're pushing out an upgrade to you, have they appropriately tested that so it's not going to mess up your system when they push it out to you? So we're recommending that there be a review of those reports each and every year that's documented to show that that's been done. And then finally, we noted one item as we were looking through your census for your other post-employment benefits, OPEB. I swear that's going to be the final acronym of the day. There is a liability you have on your books for your OPEB plan. And when you do evaluation, a census gets sent off to them. We do some testing of that to say, hey, is this core documentation that's being sent off to for the valuation, is it accurate, right? Does it have all the employees that have the right information? Because that drives what the actuary is doing and the result they'll come up with. So as we were doing some testing, we were finding, at least in one instance of all the samples that we pulled, one instance where there's some dates that were slightly off from what we were seeing in personnel files. So that was something where we said, hey, a more, a better review and a better report really from your system to generate, because right now it's a very manual process to put that together and send that report off to your actuary in that case. So some recommendations there. Real quick, we just went through the leasing standard. We know there was an impact there. Now there's another one coming next year. Your finance team is very, very excited about this one as well, as just as much as they were with the leasing standard because of the changes that it will have. And there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into this. And with the leasing standard, there was as well. Your finance team worked very, very hard to implement that. This next one has to do somewhat very similar. The accounting is very similar to what we just saw with the leasing standard, where you have this asset and liability on the books. This one has to do with whenever you are using someone else's software, so you don't own the software, but you're paying a subscription payment for it. If you stop paying that, you don't get the software anymore, right? So that's what they're talking about with this subscription-based IT arrangement. So it's almost like a lease for IT software is what they're talking about. That wasn't part of the leasing standard, so now they're doing that with IT arrangements. It's something that your team definitely is aware of, they're working through. This will impact your financial statements for next year. So more changes to come there. Other than that, of course, I'll be here for questions, but a big thank you to, of course, Mike, Melanie, the rest of the finance team, and everyone else that we worked with at the district. We're not, I mean, finance, has the biggest burden in this process, but we're talking to a lot of folks throughout the organization each and every year to understand those internal controls, because they don't just happen in finance. So I appreciate everyone's help and kind of that all hands on deck approach from your staff. Any questions?
Excellent. Thank you. Mike, are we?
Any questions regarding Keith's presentation? Okay.
Okay. You're good.
One comment. I want Keith rest assured that the audited financial report, clean audit, is the original clean audit.
Right. Let's just make that clear.
Yes. And that while wildfire is important.
Thank you, Director Laliotis.
Use the vote to get it going.
That's all I have to say about that.
Okay.
Great. So there is no direct cost associated with accepting this audited financial report for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022. The recommendation this evening for the board to consider is accept the audited financial report for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022. Real quickly, I would like to thank Moss Adams and working with them collaboratively with 87. I look forward to 96 working with you as well. I was thinking about an 87 tattoo, but now I might kind of work in 96 as well. And Melanie's here tonight, and I would really like to thank her and her team for all their efforts for a successful audit and all you do here for the district. So thank you. And
yes.
And let's see. What else do I have? Oh, and new for this year, I know we're all PDFs, but we do actually have bound hard copies of the ACFR. We haven't done that in a while, so if you wanted to have good reading material for your coffee table at home or at work, this is a great document. I'm happy to hand that to you after the meeting. So
nice images on it too, so it's it'd be excellent for that. Shauna, is there any public comment on this item or
No,
in the
Mr.
audience?
President.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.
A lot of hard
very
work.
much. Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we accept the audited financial report for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022.
Second.
Hey, look at that.
There we
Motion
go.
is second. Shauna, roll call, please.
Thank you, Director Aguero.
Yes.
Director Finn.
Yes.
Director Harris.
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis.
Yes.
President Bender.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Okay. One more action item. Everyone's Sounds good. All right, we've got, all right, thank you very much. Have a good evening. Great to see everyone in person.
thank you.
We've got an IRP, Joe. Consideration of a professional service agreement with Aspen Environmental Group for integrated resource planning services.
Good evening, President Bender and members of the board. This is action item 20. Pardon me, never gets old. The district is facing future challenges related to energy growth and power supply resources. These challenges include, as shown on this list, load growth due to customer growth and electrification, new and legislative and regulatory initiatives. And thank you to CMUA staff who gave us a briefing tonight of all those, some of the new ones coming at us. New and expanding distributed and demand side resources, things like solar and batteries with our customers, and increasing amounts of intermittent renewable resources in our power supply portfolio. Staff has engaged in a variety of power supply planning, budgeting, and reporting activities over the years. These have come to the board, but we have not prepared a formal planning document that integrates both the supply and the demand side resources. In the industry, this is known as an integrated resource plan, or IRP. Staff anticipated the need for consulting services, for consulting assistant with the development of the IRP, which would generally include the following items: a load forecast, developing a load forecast, assessment of our current and potential power supply resources, including the financial impacts of those resources, and to consider impacts of both present and future energy efficiency and demand-side management programs in the district. The IRP will help the district to meet energy growth and our power supply challenges in the future. You can think of the IRP as a strategic power supply roadmap to establish and optimize long-term plan options for energy resources in the future. And the IRP will also help balance critical district objectives, including reliability, fiscal responsibility, environmental stewardship, and regulatory compliance. We issued a request for proposals, an RFP, back in April. We opened bids, proposals in May of this year. We received 5 proposals from the listed firms. They are listed in alphabetical order. And I would also note that they represent pretty much every region of the country. So we had a good response. Proposals were evaluated based on the 5 criteria listed on this slide. The last of which I will note is cost. I won't read the others. The staff committee evaluated the proposals based on the first 4 criteria for an overall technical ranking. The technical ranking results resulted in the firm Aspen being the most highest ranked technically. The cost proposals were then reviewed after all the technical ranking had been done. And there was quite a variance in price. They varied from a low of $120,000 to just shy of $300,000. GDS was the lowest cost proposal, and Aspen, the one that was ranked highest technically, was right in the middle. And then based on a review and ranking of the technical and cost proposals, the staff committee ranked the proposals in the following overall order. And I note that Aspen is the highest ranked overall. And although they were not the the cheapest, they were the strongest technically ranked, and we'll go into the details a little bit on their ranking in the next slide. So the Aspen, they received the highest overall, the highest evaluated overall ranking based on technical factors and costs. And some technical highlights for Aspen: they have experience in developing IRPs for both larger and smaller utilities like the district. They are located in California, and they specialize in supporting publicly owned utilities, POUs, in California, and they're sensitive to local needs. And they also understand the context of SB 350, 100, and 1020 relative to small utilities like us who are focused on cost. Of course, SB 350, 100, and 1020 establish the renewable and clean energy requirements for California utilities. And although they are not the least expensive, Aspen has valuable California IRP development experience, while the next highest ranked firm did not. Therefore, staff believes that Aspen's proposal is the most advantageous and beneficial to the district. This is a quick snapshot of the IRP project schedule. You can see it's fairly ambitious. We're going to start, depending on board approval, of course, in mid-June, sometime this month, and then we'll have the last presentation to the board in December, brought to you by your brand new utility director, not me. So it will happen this year. Aspen's fee estimate to perform this work is a fixed cost of just under $200,000. Staff recommends, like in other arrangements, a 10% change order allowance for a total not to exceed authorization of just shy of $220,000. The fiscal year 22-23 budget includes $160,000 for each of the board's 4 strategic initiatives. The fiscal 23 funds have not been spent this year, and so staff recommends that those funds be used to fund this IRP. And then the $60,000 remaining or overage would decrease the electric utilities operating reserve by about 1%. However, there's the potential for the utility to be under budget for non-purchase power expenses this year. However, we have a $6.5 million operating reserve, and this balance is sufficient to fund this potential but not forecasted overage. Therefore, staff's recommendation is to authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement for integrated resource planning services with Aspen Environmental Group in the amount of $199,900 plus a 10% change order authorization for a total not to exceed amount of $219,900. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Run out for a minute.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Joe will be right back. So, any public comment on this item?
No, Mr. President.
Got it. Any board discussion or questions?
No, I appreciate that presentation. I'm surprised that only one California-based company put in a proposal, considering where we stand in the energy arena. So,
yeah.
But I appreciate the nexus between what they're doing and all of the complexities in California and how that will be a benefit. So, because I totally agree with that. So, thank you for the presentation, and I really look forward to seeing this play out.
I have a couple questions.
Please do.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, dear, all good.
Thank you very much for this. Is this going to be we're getting this information put together and this report done within 6 months. That's a quick 200 grand that's going to be spent in 6 months. Is this something that's going to be an annual item that will have to be updated? Like the wildfire plan needs to be updated, every 3 years. Or is this just kind of a one-shot deal?
Well, that's a great question. I would
You're like,
say
I'm retiring. Ask the next guy.
Joe's out, man.
It's a one-time deal for Joe.
I believe that this certainly can be revisited in the future. I think this document and this plan will help the district for the next several years. I think certainly it could be, the board could consider updating this in the future. It's a rapidly changing world and environment in the power industry. But I think to help the board, a lot of what they're going to provide as listed in, I didn't get into the details of the proposal, but they will help provide some tools to us so that we can, like spreadsheet-based tools, so that we can run our own scenarios. So I think what they're going to provide in this report is something that staff can use for the years to come. But there may be a point at which the board decides with staff recommendation to refresh it. But I think it could last several years.
I'd like to add to that, the IRP has a couple of horizons or windows that it's looking at in terms of planning timelines, 5, 10, 15, et cetera. And so a lot of those reports, the planning reports, include assumptions. And if we talk about the energy sector, there are a lot of assumptions out there in terms of the timing of available resources, the cost of available resources, transmission of available resources, and then demand-side technologies can change quite rapidly. We're seeing it. And so I think any planning report has value as long as those assumptions are still valid. And so as you talk about financial master plans, capital improvement master plans, you work through the assumptions. And I think what I would imagine, what I envision in presenting to the board would be that as some of those assumptions evolve, we can do maintenance proposals, so to speak, of the IRP. And so you contract out certain components to reevaluate it. And it may be the same consulting firm or another one that has more acute expertise in certain areas of the plan that we as a district are no longer certain of. And so this initial step is big. We're building the foundation blocks of this plan, and then we continue to evaluate it with our strategic plan and some of the changing of the energy landscape.
Okay, the next question, as you talk about planning, with the changeover with a new manager, new director that's coming in, is this going to be something that the new director is, should the new director have kind of input on it? Like, is it something that we need to hold off for 6 months until the new director gets their feet wet and understands it? Or is this something that we're like, nope, we're doing it now and we're going to, give it to the new person to implement, or just have another tool, I guess, in the tool chest of training the new person?
Great question. The IRP is a planning document that really paints a picture of the current landscape and forecasted changes and challenges. And so regardless of who the utility director is at any given time, it's a district board and staff planning document to give us kind of foundational direction of where we're going long term. The new utility directors in the future and each subsequent member of the board or staff member will use that document and will continually update it so that it's relevant. It's not a policy document, it's a planning document. And so I think it has value, tremendous value, regardless of, who our successors are in interest, so to speak.
Okay, and then the last big question I have is, I know that we just spent a lot of money out of our reserve budget for electricity. And is this kind of still chipping away at that reserve? And that may be more of a question for Mike, or is it a different reserve bucket?
As I understand, it's a different reserve bucket. What we spent money from by board action was from the rate reserve. If we were to dip into the $60,000 operating, that would be the operating reserve, a separate reserve.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to put you guys on the spot. I usually like to send my questions ahead of time, but of course, when I listen to the whole thing, I'm like, I've got more questions, so.
They're absolutely great questions. And on the cost component, I just kind of frame it in context for the public, the community. It's, a relatively costly consulting project. It's extremely critical and important in terms of the long-term planning of this district. We have this year's budget, I think, in excess of $16 million in energy procurements. Carry that over the next 10 years, we're approaching $200 million in energy purchases for this community. The $200,000 price tag to plan that correctly, I think, is really important for us to consider.
I appreciate that you went out for an RFP for it, so, and, it's funny because sometimes the least expensive one is not always the best option, so I'm glad to see that you chose the right one for us. Thanks.
Well, I agree with Director Laliotis that I'm very interested to see what comes out of this process, what this plan looks like. It is my hope that a solid document will help us to avoid the sorts of events that happened last December with proper planning, like, of course, the best you can, understanding the volatility. But I think that there are, I think everybody's going to learn from all of these events moving forward each time that maybe we can, well, for example, UAMPS came up with a response to try to help mitigate those things in the future. So I'm hoping that this integrated resource plan can help us as a district to do a similar thing, just become more prepared for the things that we can't prepare for. But you have to try, right? And there's, it's nice to have CMUA here to sort of remind us about the regulatory burdens, what the legislature is talking about. California just the CEC just set, there we go, demand response goals. They set, which is something they've never done before, which I'm sure is going to lead to policy being passed, just like the RPS, starting whatever that was 15 years ago. First they set goals, then they set the standard that we all have to abide by. So we're going to be seeing lots of shifts in how we, that are going to be mandated. Right? So this is going to help us see those coming, help us craft our own policies that we can comply with those things. There are so many things that I think an IRP can help with. Our second generation net metering decisions, what do we want those to look like? Lots of things to consider in that. A new bill just passed that EVs need to have bidirectional charge capacity. If we add that into our thinking about things, what does that look like as a resilience resource for the district? Just all of these things that I'm sure Aspen is going to fold into this plan. It's complex. It's really complex business that how all these individual things, again, we've seen that our legislators can sort of create things that don't fit into the puzzle, right? Like it's a weird extra piece that it doesn't work. So I think this is money that will be very well spent. And I'm really fascinated by this whole sort of three-dimensional real-time thing. So thank you. That's my feedback.
Did you just say a three-dimensional lasagna graph?
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Let's just eat lasagna. It'll be good. I did. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm super stoked about the IRP and really diving into this and having a great long-term plan. So, and being able to just rely on that to help us out with what everyone experienced in the West Coast regarding this. You know, I always like to just remind myself of that. It wasn't just us. It was everyone experienced that same overage of $3+ million for us. And this is going to be a great way to try and help with that in the future. So we're like, yeah, if we can get excited about power, here we are. This is it.
All right, I'll move staff's recommendation.
I'll second that.
All right, Shauna, roll call.
Thank you. Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Finn?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. All right, we have two more items before a break. All right, thank you very much. All right, we got some treasurer's report, fund balances for the month of March 2023 and disbursements for the month of April 2023. Any questions? Any public comment?
No, Mr. President.
Is there a motion to pay the bills, Joe?
Move to pass the motion.
All right. Joe's got a motion on item number 21. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Shauna, roll call, please.
Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Finn?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Pay
Yes.
the bills.
Vice President Laliotis? President Bender?
Yes, we have paid the bills that have already been paid.
Yeah. Right on.
All right, we got some minutes, May 3rd, May 24th, 2023. Comments, public comment,
No public comment, sir.
board,
No comment.
motion?
Not quite a motion yet. When I was looking over the minutes, I just noticed that some of the staff that said that they were present were actually not there. So I sent it over to Brian, and I think you guys were going to look at who was in attendance and who wasn't. So I will make a motion with those changes for those minutes.
Perfect.
Staff has yet to be able to confirm the kind of the accuracy of the attendance listed in the minutes versus the video or the actual attendance there. So we could either hold off the approval of the minutes or approve them contingent upon correcting the attendance to make it accurate.
That's fair. Sure.
Is there a second with that?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Finn?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Laliotis?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, next item up, 23, closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D2. Conference with legal counsel, exposure to litigation, one case. So we'll take a short recess and then dive into closed session. All right, thank you, everyone.
All right.
So no reportable action.
We love that.
And we're done. So I'm going to call meeting adjourned. 8:51.